This is the second video lecture for the semester. It has to do with the two most recent readings, that is Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden and Mother Tongue by Amy Tan. I just want to talk briefly about both. Ideally you have read them or will be reading them this week. They will be helpful in preparing for this next writing assignment, which is the profile. The word profile comes from a combination of two Latin words, one prefix and one root word, and it simply means a drawing or an outline. And this is why sometimes you think of the profile of someone as the side of their face. And the word profile is also has a meaning of to do a character sketch, to help us see someone else. And not vanity is helpful with that, but these other two pieces will also be helpful. So first, with Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden, if someone were to ask you what is love, how you define it and how do you describe it, and Robert Hayden does a masterful job with this poem. And he starts out with first the title, Those Winter Sundays. So winter is usually associated with the cold and the dark, and this poem will definitely describe that. And then the day of Sunday, it's associated with rest, and usually a sacred day, a day of worship. And this poem works with that as well. So the very first line, it says, Sundays too, my father got up early and put on his clothes in the blue-black cold. This is the type of cold that's like a bruise. It's painful. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made baked fires blaze. His hands are cracked, and we know they're cracked from working outside throughout the entire week. And he gets up 6 days a week early, and even on Sundays, a day of rest. He gets up in the dark that is painful, with a body that aches from having worked, and he will make banked fires blaze. He will push the coals, maybe add more coals or more wood to the fire to get the house going. And based on when this poem was written, 1966, Robert Hayden is looking back on his own childhood, which is several years before that. This is more than likely a house without electricity. And then that first section, which is called a stanza, which is Italian for room, the poet tells us that no one ever thanked him. Already what the Father is doing is a demonstration of love, and we see that he's not been thanked for it. In the next stanza, the narrator says, I'd wake and hear the cold, splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. The word indifferent means that we lack any sort of sympathy, any sort of interest. There's a synonym for the word indifferent, and it's the word apathy. And the word apathy has a fascinating meaning. It means to be without feeling or suffering. It also means to be without having suffered. There's that great statement in the Gospels when Jesus says, suffer the little children to come unto me. Be patient with them. Work to bring them to me. Allow them to come to me. And oftentimes, until we ourselves have suffered, we cannot have an appreciation or the ability to say thank you for the suffering someone else has done on our behalf. And we also find out in that third stanza that the dad has driven out the cold, as if the cold is some intruder or wild creature. The dad has gotten that out of the house and polished the poet's good shoes as well. More than likely, these are his Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, right? So the dad has done several things, and we know by the last two lines when the narrator says, what did I know of love's austere and lowly offices. This is a poem about love. It is a great example of describing love, and then the last line, the poet is going to give us some adjectives or modifiers of love. That it is austere, and it can be lonely. And he attaches this word offices to it. And if I was able to meet with you and ask you, well, what is love? Chances are, as I've been teaching this poem for several years now, we would not say love is austere. Love is an austere and lonely office. The word austere can mean bitter and harsh. There are things that we have to do in love that are unpleasant. Look at what the dads had to do. That's not very pleasant. The parent who gets up in the middle of the night to feed the infant, they might take some pleasure in that and enjoy that, but when that happens night after night and you're losing sleep and the child is dealing with some sort of other issue, it becomes very difficult. And oftentimes, the love that we demonstrate, we do that alone. It's the father's, no one's helping him at the time in the house. And the word office is a fascinating word too. It implies service, obligation, and service with a kindness. The office of love is an office of obligation, of service, even if no one says thank you. And of course, another thing that's beautiful about this poem is the narrator, the poet, is writing this more than likely as an adult and is trying to offer a type of thank you now. True love deserves attention and thanks, but it does not demand it in a way that a tyrant does or a narcissist. Love exists whether we recognize it or not. Love does what's right even if we abuse it, misinterpret it, try to define it in ways that are improper to the nature of love. But this poem is also the way of the narrator offering us a profile of his father. And then next I want to look at Mother Tongue by Amy Tan. It's a great title, and we will find out as you work through the first page of the essay that when Amy Tan refers to Mother Tongue, she's talking about the way that her mother speaks. Amy Tan is a natural-born U.S. citizen, but she was born to Chinese immigrants, and their first language, their primary language, their mother tongue was Chinese. And of course, they are having to learn English, and the rules of English can be difficult, just as the rules of Chinese can be difficult. And so while we might learn certain words, putting them together in a way that captivates an audience and is clear, it can be extremely difficult. It's why we're taking a composition class. Every one of you can speak English, right? But the ability to speak it effectively and write it effectively takes a lot of work. But Amy Tan will start off the essay with a rhetorical tactic called negation. Negation in rhetoric is the art of communication or the art of persuasion. Negation is when we define a thing by also saying what a thing is not. So if you look at the first paragraph, Amy Tan says, I am not a scholar of English or literature, and I cannot give you much more than personal opinions on the English language and its variations in this country or others. I am a writer, she says in the next paragraph, and by that definition, I am someone who has always loved language. I am fascinated by language in daily life. I think one of the reasons Amy Tan starts out by saying she's not a scholar is where this piece was first published. It was published in a journal read by scholars. There were non-scholars who read it as well, but there were going to be people who were scholars, and if Amy Tan were to say I'm a writer, they would attach to that certain expectations, and she wants to disabuse them of those expectations. I'm not going to do a word study. I'm not going to do a history of the language here. What I am going to do is provide you language from daily life. And she'll go on and she'll talk about two types of Englishes that she uses. One is called standard. And standard English is what we work on in this class. It has the rules of past perfect tense, passive voice, active voice, subject-verb agreement, logical structure, all the different rhetorical modes, punctuation, all those various things. But Amy Tan will go on and give examples of the way her mother speaks and the way that Amy Tan speaks when she is with her mother. And in the fourth paragraph, Amy Tan says, this is the language of intimacy, of family talk, the language I grew up with. One of the things Amy Tan does very well in this piece is that she says something and then she provides an example of it. She does not just say, my mother is hard to understand, or my mother speaks with broken English. She'll use that term. She actually gives us quotations from her mother's speech so that we can hear that, so we can experience, and it helps us better understand her, what Amy Tan is arguing. And in this piece, Amy Tan is making the argument that just because her mother, who is a Chinese American, came over here from China, just because she's a Chinese American who speaks in an English that's hard to understand, does not mean she's not intelligent. And even if she wasn't intelligent, I would extend the argument further to say it doesn't mean she's not a human. And Amy Tan will go on to say that people would hear Amy's mother and would treat the mother in a way that was clear they didn't think the mother knew what she was talking about. And Amy Tan makes a big confession here. Amy Tan says, when I was young, I thought the same thing. Mother wasn't too sharp. My mother embarrassed me with the way that she spoke. And in the second page, Amy Tan will use several terms to talk about the type of English her mother used, whether it was broken, fractured, or limited. And if we were in class together, I would ask you, well, let's come up with some other terms that maybe aren't as, don't have such a negative connotation with it. And I would say that you could provide formal English or standard English, and then informal English, right? It might be two terms that can be used and don't have as negative a connotation. But then Amy Tan goes on to that second page and she provides two very short stories illustrating how her mother speaks and illustrating the way that people mistreated the mother based on the way that she spoke. And then Amy Tan will go from there to say, because the way my mother spoke had an influence on me, even though Amy Tan could speak English very well, when we read this essay and can tell that Amy Tan has a good control of the English language, of standard English, the way her mother spoke still had an influence upon her. So it's worth thinking about what our parents say and how they speak and how that has an influence, positively or negatively, upon us. It's worth thinking about the language we use and how it has a positive or negative influence on others and on ourselves, and what type of language are we bringing in to our lives. Out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. What we think affects what we say. What we think and what we say usually has an influence on what we do. And all of those conspire together to reveal who we are. And again, in this class, in composition class, we are interested in what the human being is. What kind of human do we want to be? And Amy Tan will drive home a big idea that just because someone speaks in an English that is not necessarily standard does not mean that they're not intelligent. But we need to be wise in how we judge that. And while I would agree with Amy Tan that her mother is intelligent, and more important than that, is also a human being, if you were to pick up the phone and try to call customer service, you probably still would not want to get her mother on the other end of the line because she'd be hard to understand. So there's this fascinating marriage happening between standard and non-standard, between formal and informal. The ability to use both, to use them in their proper setting, and to be wise in how we use language, and be wise in how we evaluate other people based on the language that they use. Thank you.